So this set of notes begins our discussion of microeconomics rather than just economics in general. And this next topic is an important concept, and it presents an important concept that we see throughout all levels of microeconomics. And the concept is elasticity. So, elasticity is a way economists measure the responsiveness of one variable to to another variable. So, it's a measure of the responsiveness and that's the operative word here, responsiveness, of quantity supplied or quantity demanded to a change in one of its determinants. So in the last chapter, we talked about all the different determinants of supply and all the different determinants of demand. So for example, income was a determinant of demand. Input prices was one of the determinants of supply. And when we measure the elasticity, we're measuring how much quantity demanded or quantity supplied changes when one of these determinants change. The most widely measured and widely used and most commonly reported elasticity is the price elasticity of demand. And that's the one we're going to talk about in this set of notes. So the price elasticity of demand is how much the quantity demanded of a good responds to a change in the price of a good. In other words, we know that an increase in the price of coffee results in a decrease in the quantity of coffee demanded. That is the law of demand. But elasticity measures by how much. By how much does quantity demanded of coffee falls when the price of coffee rises by 1%. So it's all in percentages. So it is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. So in notation, the percentage change in quantity demanded, we write it this way. Percent delta QD. This is very, very common notation. we write the percentage change in the price, percentage delta P. Again, very common notation. You probably would have seen this before. And so the price elasticity of demand is equal to the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in the price. So, there are different ranges and different values and different ways of describing the price elasticity of demand. So, our price elasticity of demand is equal to the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. We need a few definitions. So we're going to define elastic demand. Elastic demand is where quantity demanded responds substantially to changes in price. We contrast this to inelastic demand. Inelastic demand is where quantity demanded responds only slightly to changes in price. And different characteristics of the good determines whether or not demand is going to be price elastic or price inelastic. So, some of the determinants of price elasticity. And we're going to get into how to measure this in a little bit. But I just want to give you an overview of what we're talking about. So, there are several determinants of the price elasticity of demand. In other words, what characteristics of goods determine whether demand is elastic, meaning very responsive to changes in price, or inelastic, very unresponsive to changes in price. One determinant is the availability of close substitutes. In other words, if there's a good that has a lot of other goods that are close to it, so pretty close substitutes, those goods are going to be more elastic. In other words, if there are two goods that are essentially the same, then if the price of one good goes up, that means people are going to buy more of the other good, and demand is going to have a big effect on the demand of the good that the price increased. Necessities versus luxuries. So, necessities a good that people believe is necessary, or goods that are necessary, tend to have inelastic demand, regardless of what the price level, whatever the price level is. People are going to buy the good because they need it. So it's not very responsive to changes in price. Luxuries, goods that people believe are non-necessary, things that are just nice to have, are going to be much more responsive to changes in price. Further determinants of the price elasticity. Definition of the market. If the market is narrowly defined, meaning that the market is a very small select group of people, then it's going to have more elastic demand. Another determinant of the elasticity is the time horizon. So demand is more elastic over longer time horizons. In other words, I might need a certain good tomorrow, in which case I'm going to have to buy whatever's available, and I'm not going to be very responsive to changes in price because I need the good right away. But if I'm looking over a longer period of time, I might be able to wait a little bit until the price of the good falls, or if the price of the good changes, I might buy less in the long term. So I want to talk a little bit about the computation of the elasticity of demand, and because we're going to be computing it. So So again, remember the price elasticity of demand is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. It is common to express this in the absolute value. So this value will always be negative. So it's always going to be the case that a 1% increase, or that an increase in the price of the good causes quantity demanded of that good to drop, because that's the law of demand. So this elasticity will always be negative. When we report it, we understand that it's negative, so we drop that negative sign. Because it is understood that when you're talking about a price elasticity of demand, we're talking about that as price rises, quantity demanded falls. So to compute this, we need to figure out how to compute percent change in quantity demanded and the percent change in price. And there are many, many formulas for computing the percentage change. The method we're going to use is what's known as the midpoint method. It's relatively simple. And the midpoint method takes 2 points on the demand curve. So Q1, P1, and Q2, P2. So these are any 2 points on the demand curve. So the midpoint method is as follows. We compute the percentage change in the quantity demanded as the difference between Q1 and Q2 divided by the midpoint value between the two. So Q2 plus Q1 divided by 2. So the percentage change in the price level will look exactly the same. It's P2 minus P1 over P2 plus P1 divided by 2. And so the price elasticity of demand is equal to this whole mess. So it's Q2 minus Q1 divided by Q1 or Q2 plus Q1 over 2. P2 minus P1 over P2 plus P1 divided by 2. Now this looks like a mess, but it's actually really easy to compute. And so in the next slide, let's do an example of how to compute it. Okay? So if you recall from our previous chapter, we had this market supply and market demand curve for coffee. And so we're going to compute the price elasticity of demand. And so we're going to take 2 points on the demand curve. So it does matter which points we choose, but for our explanatory purposes, I'm just going to take this point and this point. So point 1 is $22 cups of coffee and $1 is the price. Q2 P2 is 16 and $1.50. So we need to figure out the percentage change in quantity demanded. So that is Q2 minus Q1 divided by Q2 plus Q1 over 2. And even though this looks like a mess, we know everything in this equation, and it's not difficult. So this is equal to 16 minus 22 over 16 plus 22 divided by 2. So that equals -6 over, that is 38 divided by 2, 19. Now this is not something you can do in your head, so 6 divided by 19 is 0.316, negative 0.316. All right, let's do the percent change in price. So the percent change in price is P2 minus P1 over P2 plus P1 divided by 2. And again, it looks like a mess, but it's not difficult work. So P2 is $1.50. So this is $1.50 minus $1 divided by 150 plus $1 divided by 2. So this is equal to 50 cents divided by $1.25. If you throw that into a calculator, you get 0.4. Almost there. So now, the elasticity, or the price elasticity of demand, is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price, or negative 0.316 divided by 0.4. Or negative 0.79. But we dropped the negative, so we just write this as 0.79. Now, this has a very important and specific interpretation. The interpretation here is that a 1% increase in P causes a 0.79% decrease in quantity demanded. And this is exactly what we're trying to determine. We're trying to determine the responsiveness of price to, or of quantity demanded to changes in price. And so there are different ranges of elasticity at which demand is said to be elastic or inelastic. So when price elasticity of demand is greater than 1, that means a 1% increase in price leads to a more than 1% increase, more than 1% decrease in quantity demanded. So that means demand is relatively responsive to changes in price. So we say the demand is elastic at this point. When the price elasticity of demand is less than 1, as it was in the previous exercise, then a 1% increase in the price leads to a less than 1% decrease in quantity demanded. So at this point, demand is said to be unresponsive, relatively unresponsive. So demand at this point is said to be inelastic. If the price of elasticity of demand equals 1, then a 1% increase in price leads to a 1% decrease in quantity. Demand is said to be unit elastic. There's also extreme values. If the price elasticity of demand equals 0, that means a 1% increase in price has no effect on the quantity demanded. Demand is said to be perfectly inelastic. And in this case, what we have here, this is an extreme case. This doesn't really exist in reality, but we talk about it in economics. If this is the case, then our demand curve for perfectly inelastic demand is going to be a vertical line. Because this would say an increase in price going from P1 to P2, it doesn't matter. We're always going to be demanding whatever that Q1 is. So perfectly inelastic demand is a vertical line. It's an extreme case, and it's where price elasticity of demand equals 0. The other extreme is where the price elasticity of demand equals infinity. And this is where demand is perfectly elastic. And that means that any change in price at all leads to an infinite decrease in quantity demanded. This really says that if the price goes up, people don't want any of the good anymore. So the good is only demanded at that price. And the demand curve here is the opposite case of the inelastic demand. A perfectly elastic demand, we have price and quantity. A perfectly elastic demand curve is a horizontal line. Because so the only price at which people will want to buy this good is P1. If the price increases at all, there's no demand for the good. Finally, the rule of thumb is a flatter demand curve means more elastic demand. So the shape of the demand curve determines the elasticity of the demand. And in the next set of notes, we're going to talk about the different demand curves, and we're going to talk about different characteristics of the demand curve and how that determines the elasticity.